discussing is indexing and slicing. So what indexing and slicing is a way to traverse through the container types that we've talked about. So just to recap, we've gone over the data types. So we've gone over Boolean, integer, float values, and strings. Then we've gone over the data type or the container types that store those data types. So things like sets, tuples, lists, and dictionaries. And now we're going to talk about indexing and slicing. And we've been doing this quite a lot already, but I guess this is a more formal explanation of what indexing and slicing is. And both these methods are ways of traversing through those container types that we've mentioned. So indexing works by calling an item in a container by its position. So we've seen that a couple times already. I'll actually explain the formatting a little bit first. So the way it's denoted is, say we have some container type, so my list, and then we specify the index. And that should look familiar because we've been doing that pretty often already. And I've already mentioned this, but Python is zero index. What that means is the first value of a container type always starts at 0. And the reason behind this, the reasoning is because of traversals. So this here is the format of indexing. And the reason why we index or why Python is 0 indexed is because it's easier for traversals. So let's create a list, again, using square brackets, and we'll test this traversal indexing concept out a little bit. Now that we have a list of apps, we can start to index. So recall that I've used the 0 index pretty often, and this will call the value at that index or at that position. So in our case of a list of apps, at the 0th index, we have the value TikTok. So when we index into the list, we see that the output is TikTok, and we can change this. We can check the third. The third is Instagram, and we'd start counting from 0 and then move onward. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So at the third index, starting from the 0th index, is going to be the value or the item Instagram. And we've been doing that quite often already. Another way to use indexing is to do it in reverse. So if we start from reverse, if we call the value -1, and I'll explain this in a little bit more detail, we get Pinterest. And in our list, we see Pinterest, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Going in reverse, we actually start from -1. Might be a little bit confusing, but that's just how this program was written. So -1, -2, -3, and so on and so forth. And we can test that out. We can type -3. -3 is Instagram. So -1, -2, -3. And that's how to index in reverse. So we can index with the positive value, the positive index, or we can index using the negative value starting from the end of a list or end of a container type. We saw with dictionaries. So we saw with dictionaries that we would index using the name of the key. So that's a little different specifically for dictionaries, but the idea is the same. We're indexing for the key and we want the value to be returned. So when we call this dictionary that we've just created, we index the key to receive the value. The same also goes for tuples. And maybe you can try that out for yourself, but I'll continue moving forward. The next part of indexing and slicing is slicing. So what slicing is, I'll denote the format in a little bit. I'll denote the format here. So with slicing, it looks a little like this. So we have a container type, then we have the square brackets, we have the start, we have a stop, and then a step. And I'll go into a bit more detail about what these mean in a moment. But this is the general format of how to slice into a container type. And one thing I want to note before I get into explaining what slicing is left inclusive and right exclusive. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit more detail after we start working with our list. So again, we're going to use our app list. So Twitter, TikTok, and whatnot. And we're going to start with, we're going to start at index 0, and then we want to stop at index 5 or index 4. And what that returns is it returns everything until index 4. And that's what I mean when slicing is left inclusive and right exclusive. So we start with 0, 1, 2, 3, till 4. So we're excluding the value number 4. or the position, the value at position number 4. So that's how you stop and start and how you slice with lists or different container types. So again, we're starting at position 0, so index 0, TikTok, Twitter, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's how you'd slice into a container type. And it's right inclusive, which means it stops and excludes the value at the 4th index. That's the stop and start. Python likes to assume things. So when we call app and we say just a semicolon, and then it actually assumes this. So it assumes app starting from the beginning only till 2. And we'll test this out. So we'll see app semicolon 2, 0 to 2. We actually get the same output. So Python likes to assume that we want to start from the beginning and move forward. The same also applies when we consider starting from some position. So let's say we start from some position 3 and semicolon, and we don't indicate where we want to stop. Python assumes this. Python assumes we go till the end. I'm not 100% sure about the final index. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, maybe it assumes this. We can see it starts from index 3. So 0, 1, 1, 2, 3. So it starts at Instagram and then just continues to the end of the container type. And we can print that out. We can print the more specific slice, and we can see that the output is the same. And it should be 6 because, again, slicing is left inclusive and right exclusive. So it stops and excludes any value at index 6. And now I'll explain a little bit about what stepping is. So recall that the format for slicing and stepping, or slicing in general, is start, stop, and then step. I've gone over the stop and start, but I haven't really mentioned step. So what step does is it iterates to some value that you specify. So again, with our app example, if we want to start at the beginning and we want every other value, so let's say every second value, or first let's start with the first value, we'll see that it just prints out the list in its initial order. So it prints out everything. If we step by 2, what it does is it starts at the beginning and it only outputs the next item. So it starts at TikTok and then it skips Twitter and then it outputs Facebook, skips Instagram, outputs Snapchat, and then skips Pinterest. So stepping kind of, you can imagine just hopping along at every second item of a container type. And we can also update this. So we can step for every third item. So we could start at TikTok and then we'll skip Twitter and Facebook, and then we'll output Instagram, and then we'll skip these other 2. And stepping might be useful if you know maybe some data is structured in a way where every third input is going to be some value of importance, and you want to move it aside to another maybe variable or data file. So that's how you use stepping. And similarly with the negative values of indexing, you can also put a list in reverse. So by stepping from -1, we're actually going through the list or the container type from the end to the front. So it'll print out the entire list from the end, starting from Pinterest and going on all the way to the end. So that's kind of how stepping works. Hopefully that was clear, the idea of stepping and slicing as well as indexing. We've gone over those throughout the workshop already. And now it is time for a little pop quiz to cover. So again, you're given a list of data types, and you can copy this out and use this. I want you to find the string in the list and return the character at the first index. And you can do this without looping. We haven't gone over loops yet. So what I want you to do is just use indexing and slicing and everything that we've mentioned previously to find a solution. And then I'll give you guys a couple more minutes. I'll give you my solution, and then we can go for a short break. So I think it'd be okay to give you guys about 5-7 minutes to work on this. And then I will post my solution. Drop down my solution to in case you haven't been able to reach one. Here we go. So we're given a list. We're given a list. My list. I'll just copy this. And what we want to do is we want to index into the list where we see that there is apple. So we see that there's a string apple. So 0, 1, 2, 3. And we're using indexing, what we've just gone over. So we index into the list and we can store this as a string. So my string is equal to this list value, or yes, this list value apple. And now when we call my string, we're going to see that it's apple, and we want to index into the first. We want to see the value at the first index, and we call that, and then we return p. So it's a really it's a little tricky to recognize that you have to store it as another variable and then index into that variable as well. But that's how you'd use indexing to access the string and then access the first index. And maybe we'll take a short break so everyone has a minute to just kind of get up and stretch, and then we'll go over the last little bit of the tutorial and hopefully answer questions if you guys have any. So maybe I will see you guys all back at 12.